ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards.
Regular listeners here at the Shipyard may recall perhaps, that I have a thing about what you humies name your ships. For example, there are some exceedingly bad names you've come up with, like the ABC Darien line of shuttles in Star Wars. As much as the A-Wing and X-Wing and B-Wing and Y-Wing make absolutely no sense, simply because the English alphabet does not exist in the Star Wars universe, the Theta and Eta and all the rest of those shuttles make even less sense. The Greek alphabet certainly doesn't exist there, so why use those terms? And then, in fairness, there are some middle-of-the-road names. For example, Infinity from Halo. Apparently the ship was originally meant to be some sort of long-distance colonization exercise, so I suppose the name makes a certain degree of sense. It just has no actual, oomph behind it. There's no there. But if you really do want a lot of there are actually some ship names out there that are actually pretty good. For example, they're so good that a certain billionaire on your planet is recycling them periodically. Like, say, a shortfall of gravitas from the Culture series. Come on, tell me that's not an awesome name. Especially for a drone wet-water Navy ship that is meant to recover automated rocket ships landing on their tails like your god and Heinlein intended, so it actually fits and works in both circumstances. Well, regardless, this week's ship doesn't have a perfect name, but I would argue that it's a little above average at the very least, so that's a good starting point, right? Well, the interesting thing is that it's actually an intersection of multiple topics that I've been talking about in the past, specifically the insistence that Hollywood puts on using constant thrust drives on ships where they are technically spinning to simulate gravity. The number of vectors involved in that doesn't add up very well and results in a very complicated problem that, of course, Hollywood simply ignores. You either spin the ship to simulate gravity, or you keep it under thrust to simulate gravity. Combining both results in some weird 45-degree angled deck, and no one really likes having to deal with that. Well, the funny thing is, this particular ship that we're going to be talking about this week solved that problem in a fairly obvious way, but it's funny because this is the only instance I'm aware of where this particular problem was solved in this particular fashion, and it's in a single solitary video game. Which is to say, Battletech. Or rather the 2018 one, rather than the 1994 one that was apparently released for Sega Genesis under the name Battletech, but then was rebranded Mechwarrior 3050. And I'm sure this is the root, or one of the many roots, of my confusion regarding whether to refer to this universe as Mechwarrior or Battletech, since the terms seem to be used fairly interchangeably all over the great maker-damned place. Regardless, since I am talking about the Battletech game, I must, in fact, be talking about the Argo. And in fact, I am. And yes, I maintain that's a pretty solid name. In fact, Battletech seems to take place about 3025 on your calendar, so it's a continuous timeline from where you sit right now to the massive stompy robots that I have so many problems with, but still, it's one continuous time stream as opposed to a fork or a diversion somewhere in your past. So, naming the ship Argo is clearly a reference to the theoretically mythological ship named the Argo, thus named because her builder was named Argus, and the people who rode her to find the Golden Fleece, that is to say, the Argonauts. Yes, Jason and the Golden Fleece rode on the Argo. It's hard to go wrong with that kind of historical name. Although, speaking of going wrong with things, it's worth pointing out that your Wikipedia nightmare keeps track of the 7 different accounts of the crew roster of the Argo and how none of them agree. It's kind of funny in a way. Mythology is like that, I suppose. All right, enough of my existential jabbering. What actually is the Argo in the end? Well, not the actual Argo. The Battletech Argo as opposed to the Golden Fleece Argo. Well, technically, she's a dropship. But she's also not at the same time. And this is where things get complicated. Again, always. We never do anything simple around here. Of course not. Because see, in the Battletech / Mechwarrior universe, there are basically 3 different types of capital-style ships that ply the space lanes in the vacuum of space. The Battletech universe actually has a number of like wet water Navy ships as well, but I'm talking about actual spaceships and large ships, not like fighters or something like that, but capital ships, like I said. To begin with, there are drop ships, and as you might imagine, these are ships generally designed to drop material to a planet from orbit, from space, from wherever it is coming from. They drop it down, drop it off, and leave. This is the primary method that Mechwarriors and their resultant mechs deploy onto planets, of course, obviously, because they're drop ships. Ancillary to this are jump ships. These are ships that have, well, a jump drive built onto them. And if I want to be briefly specific, it is a Kearney-Fukita jump drive, but we won't get into the specific details because it's got weird rules about how you have to come out above a star and whatever. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that the jump ships are pared down skeletal ships that their entire job is to simply bolt on other ships and then jump them to somewhere else. They're glorified faster than light ferries, if you want to get right down to it. But by the same token, in the Battletech universe, this affords them some degree of protection. They're kind of like, I guess, the Red Cross on your planet, only for interstellar travel. Because when you start blowing those up, you're really going to piss off everyone. Because now you're starting to limit how many things can move around anywhere. And that gets complicated. But wait, there's a third option. There are, in fact, warships in the Battletech universe. Honest to God, battleships. I'm not even joking about this. Maybe not like battleship sized, but still, there are ships that are designed for combat in space. Aside from, again, like I said, the snub fighters and so on and so forth. And naturally, these warships are engineered towards, well, obviously, combat. Amusingly, they do actually have their own Kearney-Fukita drive on board. It's a compact model in that they can only jump themselves. They can't jump anything that attaches onto them. There's some weird rules about the jump drives in Battletech, and we'll actually get there because it's relevant to the story. But the warships are simply designed to jump themselves and nothing else into a combat zone and fuck some faces. Well, okay then. Easy enough. We have classification, we have structure. Where does the Argo fit? Clearly, she is not a warship. Definitely not. Well, for example, she does not, in fact, have a jump drive of any size, whether it's compact or not. Which I guess also rules her out from being a jump ship. So by default, she has to be a drop ship, right? Right? Well, sadly, yes? It's complicated! See, the thing is, in the Battletech universe, the very largest drop ship that could actually make an atmospheric landing masses in at about 52,000 tons. Now, I have some arguments about what tons mean in the Battletech universe, and we're not going to deal with that in this episode, but regardless, it's called a mammoth, and it's a pretty big honker. Fine. 52,000 tons, right? Anyone want to take a guess at how much the Argo masses in at? Because I'm just curious now, but I guess there's no way of actually me polling you while you watch the video, so I'll just tell you regardless. Yeah. 97,000 tons. And that actually depends on which particular reference you believe. She can go all the way up to 100,000 tons if you wanted to, because why not? So this raises a fascinating question in the Battletech universe, or in any science fiction universe in general, period dot. Is a dropship if it can't drop? I mean, that's what it's classified as, but that's like classifying the little crappy ship as a warship. It's an anchor that just happens to float periodically, nothing much else. In fact, the Argo can't drop ship so hard that she actually has to carry her own Leopard-class dropships attached to her. These are each about 2,000-ton dropships that are amusingly more heavily armed than the Argo herself is, but we'll get into the armament later, who can each carry 4 mechs to the surface, which is pretty much how the Mechwarrior game operates since you're running a lance of 4 individual mechs. And the funny thing is the Leopards being attached to the Argo was actually something of a concerning point for the Battletech universe as a whole. Jump ships themselves are specifically designed to allow other ships to attach to them so that they can extend what's called their Kearney-Fukita field to the other ship. This is a byproduct of the Kearney-Fukita drive, which is basically how the jump ships do the instantaneous point-to-point, rapidly faster than FTL jump that they do. Well, this Kearney-Fukita drive, KF drive for just abbreviation's sake, is a transitive property that the jump ships can extend to a single ship attached to them, or multiple ships attached to them, but the point is you can't extend the field to a ship who then extends the field to another ship. At least you couldn't until the Argo. When keen-eyed observers noticed that a Leopard-class dropship was making a jump while attached to the Argo, which was then attached to a jump ship, the people in charge of Battletech had to go out and come up with an explanation, because that's not supposed to work in the Battletech universe. And that explanation is the multiple docking collar system. The long story short is that jump ships have a finite number of hardpoints to which you can attach other ships. And the MDCS allows you to attach those ships either to the jump ship itself or to the MDCS-equipped dropship. You can't attach more ships than the jump ship itself has hardpoints, but in the cases like the Argo or perhaps even the Behemoth, who masses in at a solid 100,000 tons and is also not capable of atmospheric landing, well, they're actually big enough that they can block some of the hardpoints on some of the jump ships. So now you can actually carry a full quote-unquote jump ship load without having to use hardpoints on the jump ship proper. It was a workaround, let's be honest here. Okay, fine, Dockmaster, enough about the stupid jump drive situation. What about that armament situation you mentioned previously, about how obviously this thing is not a warship? Well, to put it in perspective, the smallest actual intended for combat warship that I could find, just in a quick glance through Battletech's lore, is something called the Vigilant. She's a corvette or patrol boat of some type and masses in somewhere around, 140,000 tons. And along with a whole pile of other equipment and armor and of course the jump drive built into her, she also mounts 5 AC-10s, that is to say autocannon 10s, only specifically the naval variant as opposed to the actual Battletech Mechwarrior variant, whatever the hell. Also 4 large lasers, 4 PPCs, 3 normal AC-10s, and 3 White Shark missile launchers, which are apparently designed for taking out fighters or other small craft that the larger weapons can't actually target. Okay, fine. That's the, base level warship loadout. Okay, where do we go from there? Well, the Argo has 12 medium lasers, that's quite a lot, and 4 large lasers. And that's it. I mean, for an actual mech, that's a pretty good loadout. But for a starship that weighs, many orders of magnitude more than a mech, that's not a lot. In fact, the 1,900-ton Leopard dropship that the Argo uses to actually get her mechs to the ground mounts 2 PPCs, 3 long-range missile 20-count batteries, 7 medium lasers, and 5 large lasers. So strictly more large lasers, and a lot more pew in the end. Granted, I'm not entirely sure where the Argos put all that, given they only mass in at, like I said, 1,900 tons, and yet somehow managed to also carry 4 mechs, a crew of about 20, and enough fuel and supplies to last approximately 75-ish days or so. Yeah, all that in a package that's 65 meters by 51 meters by 22 meters. I really don't understand how Battletech does their math, but it's a game of math, it's just their fundamental math is fundamentally not very mathy. Fine, whatever. Okay, Dockmaster, enough with the details. The Argo is clearly not a jump ship. It's clearly not a warship. It's only technically a dropship. Fine. What the fuck is it then? Well, that's a funny story. See, the Argo, in fact, the Argo class, because yes, there was in fact a second ship that was being built, but things went bad and she got broken down for spare parts, but regardless, she was called the Myrmidon. Okay, I have some concerns about that name after following the Argo, but that's a different conversation for possibly a different channel. Anyways, the Argo class were meant to be kind of a home away from home for exploration teams, deep space exploration, terraforming, and development teams. And before I get too much further, I should specify that this particular experiment was in fact funded and built and developed and all the rest of it by Boeing Interstellar. Yes, how amusing given current events on your planet that the company you currently know as Boeing would exist in the year 3000 plus. Hopefully that got better about, bolting the door frames on their ship hatches under the actual ship. Because, wow, they got some problems these days. Anyways, the point is that the Argo was meant to support the expansion of humanity. Say some company, some organization, some government even, perhaps, identifies a solar system that has terraformable planets, since terraforming is in fact an option in the Battletech Mechwarrior universe. And they want to go and make that happen. Well, the option is you send a whole massive pile of crew ahead of the terraformers, and they build a space station, and then the terraformers shuttle up and down between the space station and the planet, doing whatever terraforming they have to do. And then the builders come along behind and shuttle up and down between the space station and the surface, building whatever they can. And it's kind of a chicken egg horse cart scenario of you need to have the humies on site to do the work, but there's no on site because the planet A isn't terraformed and then B doesn't have structures to support humans on it. Well, the Argo is the solution. It was meant to itself, with 3 drop ships bolted onto it, jump into an unknown sector, set up camp, and start doing the work while it was still in orbit. And then when the work was done, it would gather up its drop ships, bolt on to the nearest jump ship available, and go and do the same thing over again. No space station necessary, no massive construction crew. It was a self-contained forward operating base for making planets habitable. So how did this work? Well, the short story is that she had 3 separate habitation pods, and when she was under thrust, as in when she was transiting from whenever the jump ship dropped out of jump to whatever planet she was meant to be orbiting around, those pods were basically in line with the rest of the ship. So the personnel and material and equipment inside of the pods were in line with the thrust, as in they were simulating gravity by way of thrust. And then when she pulled up in orbit, as in she had to turn off thrust, in fact, I'm sure she did a retro burn and this, that, and the other. Well, once she parked, and once her orbit was stable, well, the habitation ring started to spin. The rest of the ship maintained a singular standard orientation, but the ring that supported the habitation pods would rotate fast enough to simulate possibly a full G at the extremity. And thereby, she would solve the problem that you poor squishy humans have about long-term space, zero-G, this, that, and the other, your bones don't like it nonsense. Because even when the humies were trying to figure out how to terraform the planet underneath them, they would still have a place that they could go back to and experience a full G and have, for example, 3 different MASH medical theaters, a space for recreation, a space for passengers and just hangers-on, fitness centers, a swimming pool, and all the other stuff that you would need to maintain, say, mechs, because after all, this thing did actually have the ability to have that built into it at the very beginning, because some mechs are simply, construction mechs, and they might have been useful in the end. In fact, some of the upgrades in the game afford such opportunities as not only a library, but an improved library and an arcade. This thing was meant to be a long-term home away from home for people doing dirty, nasty work who just wanted to take a moment and relax. And in this case, the arguably complicated yet somehow subtly simple solution to how do you keep humans under a 1G environment is somehow just fascinating that, as far as I know, it has not been popularized in any other circumstances. The idea that you can have the habitation pods fold and then engage thrust to simulate gravity, or they can open up and you can engage rotation to simulate gravity, is just, I mean, it's the perfect solution to all the problems. Now, there are some caveats. I mean, it does introduce a significant number of moving parts, and a significant number of moving parts that are under significant amounts of strain. I assume that when the pods are folded into thrust orientation, they are supported by the rest of the ship, but when they are spun, the only thing holding them onto the ship, well, is the hinge that allowed them to rotate away from the ship. Yeah, you got to keep that thing oiled, right? Also, you've got to have multiple access gangways into the pods themselves. When they're folded, you can't use this straight out shot from the center of the hub down the tube to the pod because, well, that's vacuum. So you've got to have an L-shaped passageway somewhere in there, and the ladders and grips and whatever the hell else will be very complicated and very annoying, but I mean, when you get right down to it, let's face the truth. It does the job, and it does the job in a way that actually makes a certain degree of sense given the level of technology you might possibly have in the 30th century, 29th century, whatever number century that is. I don't care. 31st? It doesn't really matter to me. It still makes visual sense. And for some reason, it's never been replicated ever since. I mean, it's still in the game, of course, if you want to buy the game. I don't know if you do or not, but it doesn't appear anywhere else for reasons. Yeah, what a wasted opportunity, no? And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.